everyone, this is Karen from Blue Rooster Farm, and I'm here with Andy this morning, and we are getting ready to do our final harvest for the 2024 season. This morning Andy started digging the sweet potatoes and then realized I might want to videotape, so he stopped. But it looks like we're going to have a nice crop of sweet potatoes. So what we're going to be doing today is the sweet potatoes, the tomatoes, the peppers,
because it's
apples.
supposed to frost tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what we're kind of
get it all taken care of. Yeah. Yeah, we've had upper 80s for the temperatures. It's really dry here. It's been really hot. We're finally wearing sweatshirts. We've been wearing shorts and t-shirts. So we're having a drastic change, and we are ready to harvest our final harvest and see what we have. So we're going to take you along. So the first thing we harvested was the sweet potatoes that we had planted. And remember, these were the white sweet potatoes. They look like regular sweet potatoes on the outside, but the flesh is white. And it has the texture of a regular white potato, but the flavor of a sweet potato. And I think I planted 8 or 9 hills, or just plants, I guess. And we were getting a ton. Like we've said in the past, we did not have to water our garden any this year. It was mulched well, and we just got rains at the right time. So here is our harvest of sweet potatoes. As you can see, they are just huge, and boy, they did really, really well. Our soil here has a lot of organic matter and good tilth. And so this was just a row of sweet potatoes. I don't know if I had 7 or 8 starts in here, but this will definitely be plenty for us this winter. So now we've got to haul these back to the house and get back on the other side of the garden where we've got our peppers and tomatoes. Here is the garden that we're going to go ahead and get the peppers and the tomatoes out of. We've been really happy with our garden this year. It's just really done well, even though we've had such dry weather. You can see things are drying up. The flowers are starting to dry. But the peppers have done absolutely wonderful, and the tomatoes too. Just the fact that we're having a frost tonight is the only reason we're picking everything. So we're just going through and getting all the peppers right now and filling the baskets. So here is what we harvested off of all of our pepper plants. We have Marconi, chili pie, habanero, bell. There's some banana peppers, I think, in that one in the middle there. And there we have some serrano, lots. And I think we're just going to hang the plant and let the peppers dry on the plant, at least the red ones. So we picked several boxes, but there is just a ton left, and we're just going to let these go. But we did get some picked. Got them kind of scattered around here. Got green ones, red ones. So now that we have all these tomatoes and peppers, I need to go in and figure out what we're going to do with them all. I know I'm going to be freezing, drying, canning, all different things to preserve them. If you've been watching my other videos this gardening season, you'll see that I have been doing a lot with the tomatoes and peppers and preserving them. So this isn't the only harvest we've had. We've had lots, but these will get put away too. I believe today what I'll do is get some of the Roma tomatoes on the dehydrator and start dehydrating some of them. And then I'll probably start dehydrating some peppers as the dehydrator is available. And I'll bring you along for that. All right, so here is what I've got, and I'm just going to give them a good rinse and wash. And then once I get them all clean, what I'm going to do is slice the small ones in half and then put them on the tray right here. And then we'll get that into the dehydrator. So I'm going to get these all cleaned up and get them sliced, and then I'll show you what we've got. All right, I've got 2 big sets of trays full, and you can see they're quite thick, and some of the trays aren't quite going down. I think they'll go down once I get them, but they will shrink and they will go down as they shrink, so that's fine. And just had a couple left, and I'll just do something else with those. So I'm going to get these in the dehydrator and I'll get them dehydrated. Here are the dehydrated tomatoes, and they have been on the dehydrator over 24 hours at this point. And what I have is some of them that are done and some of them that are not. I want to get them crispy. And so I'm pulling off the ones that are crispy, and if they are still moist or flexible, like this one right here, I am just turning it the upside down, and they're going to go back on. So I'm just going through all of these and getting them down to only the ones that need to continue to dry. I was tasting one of these tomatoes earlier, and it is absolutely delicious. The flavors are really concentrated, really sweet, and really good. Now, with these tomatoes, you can either grind them into a powder, or I think I am going to be doing some sun-dried tomatoes in oil. And if I do that, I will bring you guys along and show you how I do that in a future video. But right now, I'm just going to be putting them in a big Ziploc bag, and I just store it in the freezer. That way I don't have to worry about if there's one that's a little bit moist, damaging the others and getting moldy. So here is the next day, and I've got all of them now dried, and they're all going into the same bag. And then I had some peppers that needed to dry a little longer, and I had those on there too. But that made a very big bag. Here we now are doing some peppers, and these are red bell peppers that I had put on after the tomatoes, and I had made long strips that were quite big. It might have been like a quarter of a red bell pepper. And what I'm going to do now, they've dried until they're crispy. I'm going to put them in this coffee grinder, and I'm going to grind up these red bell peppers and make a red bell pepper powder, or you could even say like a sweet chili powder. And this works really nicely. It would be really nice to have a bigger one, because I do make quite a few dried peppers and stuff, but this works fine. And I'll just get all of those in there and I just pulse it. And when it's finally done, what I do is I just put it in a jar. And again, if you are sure that it's really dry, you can just keep this on the shelf and it would be fine. But because I want to make sure that it stays fresh, and we like to keep it for quite some time, I stick these jars in our freezer and just pull them out as needed. And that way I know that they're going to stay fresh. So we're getting every bit of that powder into that jar. And so that was the red bell pepper. And it was really good. It was nice and sweet. And the next pepper, these are banana peppers that were yellow, either yellow or orange. And I just split them up because I wanted to taste the difference between the red banana peppers and then the yellow or orange banana peppers. And so here I am just grinding these up, and there weren't quite as many, but it makes a really pretty yellow golden chili powder, and it tastes good too. I noticed that this had a little bit more of a tart flavor. Now these are the Marconi peppers, and these are those long Italian ones. And again, they shrink up a whole lot in the dehydrator. You can get a whole lot of peppers dehydrated and condensed in size. And so I'm doing the same thing with them. I'm grinding them up. And this powder is really sweet, but it has a little bit of a smoky taste to it. So we really enjoy this one too. And I've been making quite a bit of this powder. And I already had some in a jar. And I've run out of space in this jar, so I'm going to have to get a larger jar. So here are the peppers that we did today. We did the red bell, the Marconi, and the yellow banana. I had already done red banana. That's that first one on the left. And I'll be adding probably some more to that as well. But the Marconi, I'll be doing more, and I got a larger jar for that one. So these are all going to go in the freezer, and I already have chili pie pepper powder in the freezer, so they'll join that one. And these are so nice to have on hand because you can add them to soups, you can add them to rubs, you can make your own spice blends with them, chilies, you name it. These are wonderful to have on hand. So give this a try. I think you'll really like it. So the next thing that I did was I started working on some of the herbs. Now, since it's getting ready to frost, I went ahead and cut as much as I wanted of all of the herbs in the garden and in my pots, and I hung them on my racks and took down the stuff that was already dried. And here I've got the dried herbs that were hanging earlier. And this right here is the celery seed that I had grown on the celery plants that I had planted last year. This year they just went to seed. And I've had this in a brown paper bag after I dried it just to keep all the little seeds together. And so what I'm doing is I'm just laying it over a big pan and just pulling the little tiny seeds off of it and letting them fall into the dish pan. And so this just takes a little bit of work. I'm not being too picky because I will be running this through a screened sieve, and that should help take out some of the things that we don't want in it. Here's what I have left after I have removed everything from the rest of the plant. And as you see, as I shake, the very fine seeds come through, and I can get all of that larger stuff separated from the seeds. And if you look really close, you can see some really fine stems in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a finer wire sieve and put the stuff that's in the pan now into that sieve, and then we're going to shake that through so that we'll even get it more pure. And so here we are, just getting just the seeds and nothing else. And so we will get as much as we can, and this will be jarred up. And here we have the jar of our own celery seed, and it's ready for the shelf. This next herb is the dill seed, and I am just rubbing those seed pods together, and they're falling off of that flower head. And I'm going to be keeping these seed pods whole, just saving them as the dill seed for seasoning. Of course, you could just plant these as well. If you wanted to grow dill next year, these would be perfectly good to use to grow more dill plant. And earlier in the year, I had dried the dill leaf, and that's just that fine fern-like leaf, and I put that into some jars, but this I'm going to keep as the dill seed. And so after I get all the seed in, this time I am putting it in a sieve, and whatever is coming out of the sieve is the dust and small particles that I don't want. The dill seed is staying in the sieve. And as you can see, as I shake it, some of those little stems kind of clump together, and I'm able to remove those. So I'm just going to get as many of those little tiny stems out, but of course those are edible as well, so I don't have to have them all perfectly cleaned and removed, but I will get as many as I can get out. So I will continue to work this and break up those little stems and push them through the sieve. So here we have pretty clean dill at this point, and it looks like this is at just about at the stage of putting it in a jar. So there's what it looks like. And we're going to get a little jar to put this in too. And I always put the jar in a bigger bowl, so that way if I spill it, which I always do, I can just pour it into the jar after I get it filled with the others. So this worked out really well. And I've got lots of dill, and a lot of times I just use it as a dried floral arrangement in the fall. And there's the stuff that I need to get back into the jar. And so there we go. Got it all in there. It's ready to go on the shelf. And I'll be putting labels on these as well. Our next herb is basil. Now, I told you earlier that I usually freeze my basil because that really keeps the flavor. But I do dry some because sometimes you have some herb mixes that ask for dried basil. And if you're using dried basil, it's best to keep the leaves whole until you're ready to use them. And then crunching them will release the flavor and keep them fresh longer. So this is the purple basil here. It's a really pretty color when dry. And so I'm just going to go through and remove all of the leaves from all of these bundles, and I do have green and purple mixed together, which is fine. I like them both. There's not much of a difference really in the taste, so they're fine mixed together. The leaves are now removed from the stems, and like I said, I'm going to just keep them whole leafed and put them in a large jar that's sealed. And you want to make sure your herbs are very dry, and these are. If they're not dry, they could cause some molding, so be sure you keep them nice and dry. And they all fit just perfect in that jar. And then I will be sure to put the lid on tight to keep it fresh. And that's ready to go on the shelf too. Up next is parsley, and I've got both the curly and the flat leaf. And again, I usually prefer to freeze my parsley, and I have lots of bags of parsley in the freezer because it maintains its flavor so much better frozen. But again, there are some recipes for seasoning mixes that I need dried parsley for. So I will go ahead and remove the stems and keep the leaves whole. That way they will retain as much of their flavor until I need to use them. So I'm going to be doing this the same way as I did the basil, whole leaved, and as I need it, I'll take it out and then I'll crush it to release the flavor. And we have a very nice little mess of parsley leaves, and we're going to put it in a nice sealable jar and keep them fresh on our shelves just like this. And you may notice that I have lots of different kinds of jars, and I like to pick them up a lot of times at secondhand stores or at antique stores, flea markets, wherever I see them at a really reasonable price. Sometimes I find some at Marshall's or Hobby Lobby or things like that, and I get a nice little collection. So there it is. It's ready for the shelf. And next up is oregano. And here's just a few bundles that I have. I've dried lots of it throughout the season, and I've got more that's hanging. So I'll be adding to this. But we do the same thing. We just take the leaves off the stems and put the leaves into the pan. And these dry leaves will go into their jar as well. You know, a lot of people probably are looking at this saying, why do you go to all this work when you can just go to the store and buy a jar of herbs? And I understand that, but I also know that I really enjoy doing this. It's fun knowing that I've grown this and that I can make all sorts of blends of seasonings and use them when I cook and know that there's no pesticides or anything on them. And having the fresh herbs in the summertime when you're cooking, there's nothing like the taste of the fresh herbs with the things from your garden. So there's really a sense of pride and knowing that you are capable of taking just a little tiny start of a plant or just a little tiny seed and growing it into something that has so much flavor and that is something that you will use to make wonderful food. Right now I am pulling the leaves off of the sage stems, and sage is really an interesting plant. The leaves are quite thick and they're a bit furry, and if you blend it up in an I guess a grinder, it will form kind of like one big puffball. It's kind of like insulation. It's just this fluffy stuff that is so interesting looking. And of course, it has a wonderful aroma. But today I'm not going to grind it. I have some already ground, and I'm going to keep this whole because it will maintain its flavor being kept whole. So I will just put all of this in a jar. Here is a couple of bundles of my dried stevia. And again, I've been harvesting this throughout the summer. This is just 2 bundles. And it is wonderful to sweeten iced tea. You can make liquid stevia drops with it. It's very easy to do. Um, just a neat plant. Um, I know when the boys were young, we used to grow some of this sometime, and they would love to pick a leaf off and eat it because it was so sweet to taste. So I'm just stripping the stems of their leaves, and this I'm just going to keep whole leafed. Sometimes I grind it up, but this one right here, just to keep it fresh longer, I'm going to jar it up as the whole leaf. And I'm using a big jar for this because I do have several more bundles that I need to add to it. So I will just leave space in this jar. And here is some mint from the garden. And again, I'm just stripping the stems of their leaves. And mint is really good for teas. There are some meats that taste really good with mint as the seasoning. Also, simple syrups can be made for drinks, or you can flavor ice cream, or puddings, or cookies, or cakes. And so there's a lot of things to do with mint, and it smells so good. When I'm doing this right here, my kitchen was just smelling so fresh and minty. I'm going to leave the mint leaves whole as well and just put those in a jar. And that way, when I want to use it, I can take out what I need and make it. And the final herb in our video today is coriander seed. And coriander seed comes from the cilantro plant. And these are just little ball-like seeds, and if you crush them, there's lots of tiny little seeds inside of these balls, and they have kind of a lemony, and a bit of a cilantro taste, so they're very flavorful. So all I'm doing is removing them from the stems and putting them into this bowl. And then, of course, I will run them through a sieve. But this time the sieve is going to keep the coriander seeds in it, and the little particles that are just little particles from the plant will go through and into the bowl. And that way I will just have the seeds in my jar. I have already jarred some of the coriander up earlier in the year, so I will just be adding these seeds to that batch. I'm trying to think what other items I have already been putting up from my herb garden. One thing is chives, and I just dry them by hanging them. Sometimes I use a dehydrator on a really low setting, and it seems to keep the green a little better. And then I store them by just cutting them into little snips about a 1/4 inch long and putting them into a jar. I did not show you rosemary today, and usually when I do rosemary, I will either pull the little, they're little prickly type stems for leaves, I will either pull those off and put them in a jar or break them up a little bit, or I will grind them. And then this year I do have some lavender, and I am just going to be drying it and using it for the aroma and not necessarily for some herb. But these are all the herbs that I've grown this year, and I'm so proud of them. And they do taste so good, and it's so much fun to make my own seasonings. I hope you like this video, and if you do, please consider subscribing to my channel. I would really appreciate that. Also, if you share or if you give me a thumbs up, it will help the algorithm to push my videos out so that more people can see them. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment in the box below. I hope you have a great week, and I hope you come back and watch more of my videos.